Section 3. Injustice Unfolds, Captivity, and a Plea Deal for the Victim. This section of the book covers the time period in which I was held like kidnapping victim. I was kidnapped by the state under the false belief that I was the perpetrator when in fact I was the victim. It was horrifying. The guards were like inhuman robots, not unlike the police officers that arrested me. I was desperately needing to trust my lawyer to fight for me. I should have known he was doing nothing at all to show he cared about my case. This would become very obvious when I discovered that despite knowing that I was innocent, despite knowing that I was the victim, he threatened me to accept a plea deal as if I'd done something wrong. Chapter 11, Holding the Victim Captive. First few months. The early morning hours were a blur as I was hauled off to jail. I walked on autopilot, my mind unable to process the reality of what was happening. The truth, the only thing I had left, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The truth collided with the reality of my situation. The police, who were supposed to protect me, now held me captive. Just hours ago, I had been the helpless victim of a brutal attack, begging for help and justice against the ferocious creature that attacked me. And yet here I was, locked away behind bars, treated as if I were the one at fault. The cell door was cold and heavy, closing with an echoing clang, like I was sealed within a steel coffin. I was still wearing the padded suicide outfit, a degrading garment designed to strip away any remaining shreds of my dignity. While I'm not a deity, I can use the word crucifixion because of the humiliation and punishment despite having done no wrong. It seemed like the nightmare I couldn't wake from was now my cruel reality. I vacillated between numbness, having gone away in my mind, and bitterly weeping. Sleep was nearly impossible, and hopelessness was a heavy weight on my heart and lungs, shattered by shame. Although I couldn't fully comprehend it at the time, I knew that eventually I would feel anger toward Anna for her actions. However, in this moment, all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of shame and disbelief. She had deceived others and ruined my reputation, making me into a villain rather than a victim. The detectives had bought her lies without hesitation, and she had manipulated reality to make it appear as though the opposite of the truth were true. In the morning, a guard escorted me to the medical area of the jail, where I received my prescribed medications. But what stuck with me most was my meeting with the social worker. The words she spoke replayed in my mind over and over like a cruel refrain. No matter what happens, there will always be people who believe you're guilty. The finality of her statement weighed heavily on me. Even if the truth of my innocence and victimization were proven, the accusation would always leave a stain that could never fully be washed away. It would be forever etched into criminal database records, following me wherever I went. The arraignment. I was shuffled into a courtroom with others awaiting arraignment. The scene was chaos, lawyers rushing from one defendant to another, prosecutors skimming over cases they knew little about. I tried desperately to catch the attention of one of the public defenders, a woman I thought might help. I tried desperately to get her to listen to my story, how I had been covered in blood, how I was the victim, how none of this made sense. She barely looked at me. "Tell this to your lawyer when you're assigned one," she said briskly, moving on to someone else. I was left standing there, hollow and helpless. My voice didn't matter here. My innocence didn't matter. How many times must I be victimized? First it was by Anna, then the detectives. Now this lawyer, who's supposed to represent those who are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. Abandoned by family, I clung to the hope that my family would save me. Surely my parents, flawed as our relationship was, wouldn't let me face this alone. I called them, my voice shaking with desperation. Mom, Dad, please help me. I can't be here. I can't cope with this. Their response was chillingly detached. My father's voice was flat and emotionless. No, we can't afford it. I pleaded, explained the charges, the $75,000 bail, and what this would mean for my future. Nothing moved them. Not my pain, not my fear, not my utter desperation. Even strangers might have shown more compassion than my own family. I thought of the scene in Return of the Jedi where Luke, writhing in agony, cries out, "Father, please help me." Even Darth Vader, a symbol of evil, had been moved to act to save his son. But my family, they left me to rot. Reality versus truth. After returning to the jail, I learned about the reason for the charges against me: kidnapping and second-degree sexual offense. I saw Anna's statement, her lies crafted into a version of events that didn't come close to matching reality. And there were witnesses. They were not in the room after she locked herself inside with me, but they would have seen and heard enough. She claimed I had pulled a door into my room and attacked her, but none of it made sense. Witnesses saw her enter willingly. The layout of my apartment didn't match her story. The physical evidence, my blood covering the room, contradicted her every word, and yet none of that seemed to matter. In jail, the truth was meaningless. Reality was what the system decided it to be, and that narrative would replace the truth. The weight of fear. I found myself surrounded by dangerous individuals, people who had committed violent crimes, when I unexpectedly encountered a man who had been on death row. In an eerie twist of fate, I had crossed paths with his cellmate sister years earlier, back when I worked as a social worker 3, essentially a therapist, at the mental health center in Duplin County. This man, now sitting across from me at Durham County Jail, was here for a new trial. Somehow I discovered that his former cellmate had been none other than Johnny Street Parker. In the tight-knit community of Clinton, North Carolina, news traveled fast. Everyone knew someone. I remembered the day Johnny Parker's sister walked into my office, her shoulders slumped, oversized sunglasses hiding her face like a shield. Her shame was palpable. Her brother had, according to what I had read, brutally murdered a man with an axe. The crime, linked to drugs, was gruesome. The victim, who was gay, had been mutilated. The details blurred in horror, but I recalled reading that his severed body part was found at the bottom of a staircase. I could feel the weight she carried, the humiliation of being related to someone who had committed such a horrifying act. And now, here I was, years later, face to face with a man who had shared a cell with Johnny Street Parker on death row. He was back for a retrial. He and his girlfriend had kidnapped a man, and she had murdered him to impress him. These were the kinds of people around me. I felt like I didn't belong, like I had been kidnapped and dropped into someone else's nightmare. But the worst fear came not from those around me. It came from how others perceived me. The broadcast news made things worse. Inmates always want to know what you're in for, and since I wasn't being treated as the victim that I was, the reporters had no obligation to protect my identity. They didn't. How much more insanely terrifying could a story get? Reporters usually protect the identity of a victim, even when the so-called victim is actually the perpetrator. But because I was falsely assumed to be the predator, no one protected me. They reported on the case, referring to Anna as a girl, as if she were some innocent child, rather than a 26-year-old woman. The narrative cast her as helpless, and me as the threat. And in jail, the words Sexual offense carry enormous weight. It marked me. It painted a target on my back. I tried to explain the truth to a few inmates. I was still in shock. One of them finally spelled it out for me. "We have to protect you. The news made it sound like you hurt a kid. Had they not believed me, I might have been attacked." Some inmates understood what was really going on. They shielded me, but the fear never left. The truth had been turned completely upside down, and I was left to live in the wreckage of that reversal. Reflections. As I sat alone in my cell, my mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. I had never been in a fight, not once. Yet here I was, caught up in a situation based on a lie. I had used a punching bag before, for exercise and to manage stress, imagining scenarios where I stood up for myself. But in reality, I had always shied away from confrontation, afraid of causing harm. Memories of living with Lynn came flooding back, along with the times I hit the bag after an intense argument. Lynn would often follow me, insisted. "I am not done talking," as she entered the garage. My reaction was always the same, immediately halting my punches, driven by an instinct that occurred faster than conscious thought, terrified of even the slightest chance of hurting her. Unimaginable. Of course, I loved her and didn't want to harm her, but the instinct to stop was more profound than love. It was an innate aversion to violence. The same instinctively gentle hands had held Kelta, who was even more fragile than Lynn. I remembered the moment we posed for a photo and Celta began to fall. In a fraction of a second, before my mind could plan, my body moved to catch her without causing harm. The notion of me as someone who could inflict pain was almost laughable, if it weren't so tragically real. And yet it was this very idea that now defined my current predicament, leaving me caught between my peaceful nature and the harsh reality surrounding me. I sat there in that cold, lifeless cell, accused of something that went against everything I had ever stood for. My body was aching, but my mind was spinning. How could this be happening? Memories flickered through my mind like fragments from another life. I remembered Karen, one of the first trauma survivors I had ever helped process the horrors of her past. She had looked at me with that vacant, haunted stare, barely able to speak. I remembered how I had helped her feel safe again, how she had smiled when it was over. That smile meant everything. And now I was being accused of harming someone, yet I knew I was the victim. And in that moment, I began to understand something else, the shame that victims feel, the way shame clings to us, even when it's undeserved, the way it should belong to the person who caused harm, but ends up living in the one who was hurt. I had spent years helping survivors of sexual violence. I knew what real trauma looked like. I had sat with people in their darkest hours, offered them my voice when theirs had been taken. I had walked into the fire with them, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because someone had to. And now they were calling me dangerous? I couldn't understand it. I couldn't even breathe right. It felt like my past, the truth of who I was, had been erased with a single accusation. So many women are real victims of sexual violence. I had seen it up close. And Anna had targeted me. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't even breathe right. It felt like my past, the truth of who I was, had been erased with a single accusation. Desperation and questions. So many days and nights consisted of me sitting alone in my cell, wondering if I would receive my medications, if I was actually let out of my cell, if the nurse didn't forget, I could ask for a painkiller or a PRN med to ease the pain, physical or otherwise. The mere existence of this ability to request PRN medications for unusual distress was an anomaly in the circumstances that were characterized by indifference. It is an understatement to say that this did not reflect the notion that people are innocent until proven guilty. It may have been good or bad. It's hard to tell. The time when I had a blister that made walking painful. I must have gotten my socks and shoes wet coming from the shower. Eventually, I was taken to see the nurse and given something for the pain, and the blister was treated. Would I ever be free? Would I ever find someone who could love me? Knowing the accusations that would always linger, would anyone see me as more than this false image Anna had created? The questions consumed me. I was writing letters to my assigned lawyer, pouring out my side of the story, hoping someone, anyone, would listen. The waiting felt endless. The truth felt useless. And the system, like my family, seemed intent on leaving me to fend for myself